On the evening of Wednesday, February 4th, 2026, an active shooter situation unfolded in West Flagstaff, Arizona, near the historic Route 66 corridor. As ground officers engaged the suspect, an Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopter was deployed to assist. Now, during that response, the helicopter crashed, killing both crew members on board. Today, we're going to walk through what is known and maybe talk a bit about the risks involved in this area or with this helicopter. So stick around for the full story on this episode of the Dr. Medic. Now, officers initially responded to a domestic violence call that escalated into a prolonged active shooter situation. The suspect, armed with a semi-automatic long gun, reportedly engaged officers from multiple rooftops. The exchange of gunfire lasted nearly 2 hours before the suspect was ultimately shot and taken into custody. A video from that evening shows the environment law enforcement was operating in, including one video that shows the helicopter descending rapidly from the sky before impacting the ground. Now, the aircraft involved was Ranger 56, a Bell 407 helicopter with tail number November 56 Alpha Zulu. The Bell 407 is a single-engine, four-blade utility helicopter widely used in law enforcement and EMS aviation. Now, the Arizona DPS Aviation Bureau operates 3 Bell 429 helicopters and 2 Bell 407s, along with a couple of King Air fixed-wing aircraft. Now, these aircraft operate from air bases across Arizona, including Kingman, Flagstaff, Phoenix, Deer Valley, and Tucson. They don't routinely patrol for law enforcement, but these aircraft remain at their base until dispatched for specific missions such as search and rescue, tactical overwatch, or law enforcement support. Now, all of these DPS aircraft are equipped with terrain awareness warning systems, otherwise we known as TAWs. Night vision goggles are standard for crew members, and the Bell 429 fleet includes 4-axis autopilot capability and hoist systems, while the Bell 407 does not include autopilot nor a hoist. Now, remember, I said that the trooper was also a paramedic, which means that in addition to search and rescue operations, this service also would have the ability to provide advanced life support to any patient that they bring into this aircraft. Now, only their 429s have a hoist, but the 407 is still a great helicopter for search and rescue operations, especially obviously ones that don't require a hoist. Now, on this particular Bell 407, though, it has a unique setup in that normally the patient litter system would occupy the entire left side of the aircraft, including the open seat on the pilot's left side. But the configuration that Arizona DPS had it in, the trooper paramedic can actually sit in a seat in the front left, and if they end up for some reason transporting a patient, they can remove that seat back and combine the seat back into the litter system and transport a patient who is supine or laying down. Now, I don't know, this may prove important in this case because even though this helicopter can transport medical patients, it is pretty unique to have a paramedic sitting up front on a Bell 407. Now, on board that evening was pilot Robert Bruce Skanke, and I have heard wonderful things about Pilot Skanke. I mean, he was a career pilot in the Marine Corps, and then after retiring, I believe he flew air medical for Guardian Air, also out of Flagstaff, before moving over to Arizona DPS to fly these 407s. Now, the paramedic on board was Trooper Paramedic Hunter Bennett, and the flight paramedic role within DPS requires full Arizona Peace Officer certification, in addition to advanced paramedic licensure and aviation operations training. So while Hunter was a paramedic, he was also a fully sworn law enforcement officer. These crews, they're cross-trained professionals, and they integrate aviation and tactical law enforcement rescue ops and EMS capabilities. Pretty cool. Now, during the active shooter response, the helicopter crashed west of downtown Flagstaff, and witnesses reported hearing kind of like a pop before impact, and both crew members were killed in this accident. There is video of the impact, and let's take a look and we'll see the video here.
Fuck. Oh, fuck.
Wait a minute, what the?
Holy shit.
Fuck!
Oh, my.
Oh my
Oh, fuck.
Wait, why? How? What?
It just spun out of control.
You know, and really all we can see is that this helicopter is basically coming straight down with no forward movement, but also appears to be rotating, as you can kind of see the spotlight face the camera and then facing the terrain there in the background before it hits the ground. So Let's jump over here to the ADSB data, and we can see it looks like they had a pretty busy day and actually took off from Kingman Regional Medical Center. I don't know if that's where their actual base is in Kingman or not, or maybe they just took a patient there. But either way, they had been there for about an hour after flying in earlier, and they took off at about 0400 Zulu time, which that would make local time there about 2100 hours or 9 p.m. there in central Arizona. Now remember, the shootout with this suspect had already been going on for quite some time, and I think it was over a 2-hour shootout by the time everything was completed. And so this helicopter, again with call sign Ranger 56, departs Kingman Hospital at about 2100 hours, and it's quite a long flight over there. It's about 150 miles, roughly due east, and you can see it takes them a little bit over an hour to get on the scene of this shootout, which has been occurring the entire time that they've been in this flight. Now, you know that's probably important because obviously they cruised for nearly an hour without, any issues whatsoever with this aircraft. Right? So now Kingman over here, you can see is about 3,300 feet of elevation, and Flagstaff is really closer to about 7,000 feet of elevation. So this entire flight that they're flying from Kingman here over to Flagstaff, averaging around 500 to 1,000 feet above the ground. But the entire time they are climbing because the ground itself is increasing in elevation underneath them. And by the time they get over here to Flagstaff, like I said, the elevation now is at about 7,000 feet. Now, as they approach the scene here, they're coming in, it looks like on the south side of this hill right here. And this hill is about 300 or 400 feet higher in elevation than actual downtown or Flagstaff proper down here, which again, like I said, sits at about 6,900, 7,000 feet, which is in itself extremely high in elevation, which we're going to talk about later, which can certainly play a role in the performance of this helicopter. But you can see that they fly in right here, and this is the scene right here, just north of this historic Route 66 road, which runs through the middle of town here and is right here in this neighborhood. And they come in, they approach the scene, they get in there pretty quickly, and looks like they're flying at about 50 or 100 feet above the ground, roughly. They're flying pretty low and they're flying pretty slow, 40, 50, 60 knots. They're doing their best to provide support to the law enforcement officers on the ground by way of their advanced imagery that they have on this helicopter, but also obviously there's a trooper up there who's armed. Now, there was no reports that any shots came from this helicopter. But either way, their primary role here is going to be providing eyes in the sky and communicating that information down to the law enforcement officers on the ground, because this jackass who is in this domestic situation is running across the tops of a lot of the rooftops in this little neighborhood here, and he's got a long gun of some sort, and he's firing at officers, and we don't know, like I said, if he was firing at this helicopter or not. Now you can see here, they really just come in and do this one loop, and they're only over this scene for about 60 to 90 seconds. And then they make this turn out to the west, and they do start climbing a little bit, and they pick up speed, and you can see that they're climbing in altitude to 300, 400, 500, 600 feet, getting up to, over 1,000 in this case right here. Now you can see that by the time they get here, they've climbed to nearly 2,500 feet. Looks like 2,500 feet above the ground. And I don't know why they were doing that. I don't know if maybe they were diagnosing some sort of problem that they were having with the aircraft, and he's trying to get some altitude to work out a problem or something like that. But maybe he was just trying to avoid gunfire, because we know that this guy had the long gun on the ground, and maybe he's trying to avoid the gunfire from the actual suspect. I don't know. I don't know why he would have gone out here, but he certainly is flying the aircraft just fine, but he is climbing and obviously gaining speed as well. But really, nothing looks wrong out here. He's just kind of climbing up and gaining some altitude, and it's possible, like I said, that he was just out there, killing time to allow the ground officers to gain some type of advantage over the suspect before they wanted the helicopter to come back in. The helicopter could have been distracting things. Again, the guy could have been shooting at the helicopter, and the pilot was just trying to get out of Dodge until the ground officers could come in and secure the situation a little bit better. I don't know. But either way, you can see that the pilot obviously comes back in. He comes back down this time, but this time not all the way to the ground level. And so even though he's flying back over the scene here, or at least pretty close to the scene, it looks like he's still, 11 or 1,200 feet above the ground, still flying pretty slow, 40, 50, maybe 60 knots. And he comes out over this hill over here. Now remember, this hill is about 300 or 400 feet higher. So at this point right here, where he's at about 7,900, 8,000 feet, you know, he's flying at about 1,000 feet above the ground at this time. And he's making a super slow left-hand turn. His speed has gone down to 18 knots, down to 11 knots. And he's still climbing though to about 1,200 feet above the ground. And that's where you can see somewhere right in here is obviously where something went wrong. And this helicopter basically just kind of fell right out of the sky, came straight down in that spinning fashion like you see here in the video. Okay, now if we take that same data and just overlay it here into a 3D map, again, here's that original departure point from this hospital over here at Kingman. You can see they take off, they start climbing, and they're cruising, like I said, at about a couple hundred feet above the ground, going over all of this terrain that is rising in elevation below them. Takes them an hour, basically an hour, a little over an hour to get over here to Flagstaff. Then as you can see, like I said, they come in right here, just on the south side of this hill. They make this downward and left turn over the scene, which is roughly about right here. And then they kind of quickly get out of the scene. They're only there over the scene for about 60 seconds coming in over this area here. Now they come back out over here, over the west, and they climb, and then you can just look at the climb that is occurring here. And like, who knows why the pilot was doing that? He's obviously a super experienced pilot. He might just be waiting over here, like I said, and he's climbed to about 2,000 feet above the ground, comes back down here towards the scene, towards downtown or towards the main part of Flagstaff. You know, and again, even though he's coming back towards the scene, you can see here that he's not 50 or 100 feet off the ground like he was the first time. He's, you know, basically up at about 1,000 feet up in the air, and he goes back out over this hill. And as we kind of turn around this way, let's kind of move the screen around here, looking a little bit more to the south, he comes back over this hill and makes this left-hand turn, kind of looks like he's going back to the scene. And it's at this point, again, right here where he loses control of the aircraft one way or another and appears to kind of just fall straight down into the side of this hill. And this is the area in which the aircraft crashed and is, you know, what you see in the video. Now, some have speculated that the suspect on the ground shot this helicopter down. And as far as I'm aware, as of now, there's been no official confirmation that any gunfire struck this aircraft. I mean, is it possible? I guess so. But even though this suspect had a long gun, man, this really isn't Hollywood, and firing a gun while running from the police and firing that gun at a moving helicopter seems like a stretch, especially also that it would bring the helicopter down, but I guess anything is possible. But again, there is nothing so far to support that claim. There has been no official confirmation of mechanical failure. There has been no official determination of cause, right? Because it's too early. The FAA and the NTSB are already on scene and investigating. Now, one small update, though, is that the suspect, in addition to being charged with 23 counts of aggravated assault, domestic violence charges, burglary, etc., he's also now charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of this helicopter crew. Now, in this video here, you can clearly see that a portion of the tail boom did separate from this helicopter in flight, as this tail rotor and tail boom did not come down where the helicopter crashed. You know, the tail rotor, appears to be intact. And now the 407 has had some history of having tail boom failures with stress fractures, causing failures and causing hardware to loosen and ultimately leading to the failure of the tail boom, as happened with this tour flight crash here in 2022 out in Hawaii, where the tail boom actually failed, and somehow everybody on that one was able to survive that accident. Now, it's hard to tell from this video, but it seems like this tail boom separation point is a bit more aft than in this Hawaii accident. But like I said, it's kind of hard to tell. But the tail boom could have failed first, or it could have failed and separated after some other failure and just separated due to the massive rotational and lateral forces that are, you know, placed upon the aircraft as it was rotating towards the ground out of control. Like I said, it's impossible to tell at this point. Another operational factor to understand when discussing helicopter operations in Flagstaff is that Flagstaff, like I was saying earlier, sits at approximately 7,000 feet above sea level, which is extremely high. And even though the ADS-B data shows the helicopter flying around 100, up to 2,000 feet above the ground, that means that they are actually flying around 7,100 to 9,100 feet above sea level. And at this elevation, in this type of aircraft, this aircraft performance is definitely going to be reduced. Engine power margins are narrower. Tail rotor authority margins can be reduced. Hover performance requires more power. Climb performance is diminished. But at the time that the helicopter went down, they were only flying at about 10 or 20 knots, and they were in a slow left-hand turn. Now, there is an advisory that warns of a loss of tail rotor effectiveness that is increased when flying less than 30 knots or at a hover, and increased with high density altitude. And for helicopters with the tail rotor on the left side, this risk is increased during slow right-hand turns, but they were in a slow left-hand turn. It doesn't mean that this couldn't be a factor. I'm just pointing out the information from this advisory. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to draw any conclusions about what caused the crash. It is simply acknowledging that helicopter operations at 8,000 feet elevation are inherently different from operations at sea level. The performance margins are tighter, the workload can be higher, and that context matters when discussing helicopter aviation operations, especially up in mountainous regions. Now, the Bell 407 is widely used, like I said, across law enforcement and EMS agencies. It's known for its reliability and agility and power, but like all rotorcraft, its performance envelope is influenced by weight, air density, temperature, and wind conditions. Now, these investigators will also be looking, though, at the maintenance records of this aircraft as well. I know there was a Bell 407 that crashed in 2022, not the Hawaii one, but a different one in New York, where there was a tail boom separation as well and a loss of tail rotor effectiveness that was due to improperly securing the tail rotor crosshead drive plate. And the bolts were never installed, or if they were installed, they were not installed correctly, and eventually they backed out, leading to the crash. Either way, what do we know? We know that pilot Robert Skanke and trooper paramedic Hunter Bennett launched that evening to support their fellow law enforcement ground officers during a dangerous and unpredictable situation. They were performing their duties. They were providing aerial support and operational awareness to the officers below. They were doing amazing work, and they did not return. Now, we also know of some similar circumstances that have contributed to other Bell 407s crashing over the years, but we also know that we do not know if any of those items played a factor in this accident. A preliminary report will probably be out in 4 to 6 weeks, and a final report, not for another year and a half or 2 years or even more. And here's a big one. Contrary to some reports that I've read, which has actually been more than one report, I would be comfortable saying that we also know that the age of this aircraft alone would not be a factor. Maintenance could be. Failed parts could be. Pilot error, or possibly even the shooter playing a role, but the age of the aircraft alone should not play a role in any of that. There are thousands of aircraft and hundreds of police and EMS helicopters that are older than 20 years, and there is nothing in the design of most aircraft that would lean towards simply the age of the helicopter playing a role in an accident like that. In fact, since research is cool, don't take my word for it. A study was completed just a couple years ago in 2023 out of Australia that specifically looked at this issue and found that results for age showed no correlation to the fatalness of accidents. So when the NTSB releases its reports, we can all review it and go from there. For now, let's honor the service and sacrifice of pilot Skanke and trooper paramedic Bennett, and we extend our respect to their families, colleagues, and the entire Arizona DPS community.